on behalf of Friends of Two Rivers, I'd like to welcome you all here, and I'm glad that you could come. My name is Gary Matson, and I'm a member of Friends of Two Rivers. We are honored to have our president here, Chuck Erickson. In case some of you don't know Chuck, and his wife Mary is also on our board, and Judy is who's in the back, has been one of the organizers. She's our webmaster, and she does a ton of stuff. And Maria Barbia is sitting here, also has been helping us with some things. And Hank, are you a member yet? He's not a member. Well, he's about to be a member. So, and just by way of background, Friends of Two Rivers, what's that? Unworn, I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes. Thank you, Mary. Well, Friends of Two Rivers originally started to support the cleanup at the mill, and we still do that. We weren't happy about everything that was going to happen there, but we felt like in the long run that it was going to be a big benefit to have that done. So we supported it, and we formed a kind of a grassroots community organization for the purpose of supporting the cleanup and the restoration and the redevelopment. Part of what we did was to anchor our support in good information. So that's kind of what this today is about. It's information you might not get other places, and it's kind of local. The Bonner Mill is unfortunately becoming a thing of the past, at least the way it has been. And so some of what Gary has to talk about today has to do with that transition. So we thought that would be very interesting to local people to have an opportunity to see that. Friends of Two Rivers does a couple other things. We're hosting an event on February 13th that you all want to come and see, and it's called Hooked on Art. It's to honor artist Walter Hook, who grew up in Milltown, and it features artists from the local area and wonderful artists that you don't realize how many fine artists we have in the community and nearby until you go to Hooked on Art. That you can see them all there. So, and then in the fall, and that's February 13th at 2 o'clock. Is that correct?
10 to 4.
10 to 4. It's a good thing we have somebody here that knows what they're doing. and that really is a good event. It gets better every year. This is the fifth annual. And then in the fall, we sponsor an event called Community at the Confluence, and it celebrates the river and all the river has stood for in the human and wildlife cultures that have experienced this place for so long. So kind of with that, is there anything else I should mention, Judy? So I will have Warren introduce Gary, and thank you.
Thanks for being here. This is, as Gary mentioned, this is our sustainability presentation, part of the 2 series we put on in a year. Today, Gary Delp from Heritage Timber is going to talk to us, present some of their work. Gary actually lives up the Potomac. Heritage Timber is a family-owned company. This is only, 1/3 of the family. There's expecting another one to arrive next month. He specializes in dismantling or deconstructing buildings. And I think it's important to remember the difference between what deconstruction is versus demolition. For instance, the Milltown powerhouse was demolished. The 2 buildings at the Champion Mill were deconstructed, and you'll see examples of that here. Gary started as a company in 1994, dismantling the Champion Mill buildings in Missoula, and he might show some of that today. I became familiar with Gary. I'm an architect. I was working on the Missoula Art Museum, and Gary and his guys took out the flooring and other things in the old Carnegie Library building for reuse. I would suggest that you visit their website, heritagetimbermt.com. That's all lowercase. It's a wonderful website, very interactive. It's got a lot of visuals to it. It's really well designed. And I'd point you in a direction that clicking in the upper right-hand corner of that website is a recording that Montana Public Radio made, interviewing Gary and his crew out at the Bonner Mill while they were deconstructing that building. You notice in some of the publicity for this, we quoted an old English saying that wood warms you twice. First time is when you cut it and chop it. Second time is when you burn it. Well, I think if you think about it in terms of what Gary does and certainly what we're hopeful with wood products, the third time might be the reuse of that product. The fourth time might be experiencing the delight of seeing that reclaimed wood and the warmth of the material. And, deconstruction is an endless process. It can happen any number of times over and over again. And wood would certainly stand up to that kind of reuse. So I'm going to shut up. Gary Delp from Heritage Timber. I don't know if you want to put that onto your jacket somewhere. Probably down about there.
Okay.
There you go. I'll run the computer for you.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Well, thanks everybody for coming out today. Missing a little blue sky in the winter, that's kind of a rarity, but I am going to, first of all, Warren mentioned that, I'm half of the company. My wife also works here, and she is actually the public speaking half of the team, and a couple days ago she was put on bed rest. We are expecting our first child in about a week. So, well, thank you. But I say that, I guess, if I stumble a little, please bear with me. And that said, we're just going to kind of wing it. I sort of would ask anybody if you have any questions as we're going through the PowerPoint, or at any time, just throw them out. That way you won't forget them. And but anyway, as way of introduction, as Warren said, we started Heritage Timber in 1994. For me, it was, I'd been traveling around the country doing concrete work, commercial concrete, came back to Missoula, and just as a temporary job, went out to the Champion Mill, or Intermountain Mill on back, and worked for a couple guys who did not get along very well as the job progressed, and I ended up buying one of them out and dropped the partner after the first job, and have kind of kept up with it ever since. I think it's interesting, deconstruction in some circles has kind of become a little bit of a fad in some ways. I believe strongly in it, but I think that people think of it as something that's happening in this new times. We're all environmentally conscious, and I think anyone who's been in the sawmill business for any length of time knows that mills have closed and buildings have been bought and taken down and re-erected for years and years. I've taken down barns on the East Coast from early mid-1800s. They had been taken down and moved to new locations. This is nothing new. I think that there is recognition on an aesthetic level for the warmth of reclaimed wood now, but certainly what I do has been done for countless millennia. I think we'll just kind of go through the PowerPoint and sort of describe what we do through the visuals. And like I said, if you have any questions, please just just shout them out. Deconstruction. So I guess that's self-evident. This building was the most recently the Karst bus barns out in Anaconda, but originally Anaconda had an electric trolley system. This building was built around 1908, as best I could determine, and it's where they would service their electric trolleys in Anaconda. We took off the roof of the building and some of the interior, and then a demolition company knocked the rest of it down, but as the brick was brought somewhere where somebody was going to clean it and try and resell it.
That Anaconda trolley operation was the last trolley operation in Montana.
Oh, is that right?
It continued on operation until 1954.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it was a really neat old building. There were timber trusses on the inside, and actually this is a perfect example. The building was 60 feet wide, the principal part of the building, and on the end there were 3 trusses, and the bottom quarter of the truss were full length 60-foot 12 by 12s. That had bolt holes, and they had been taken out of another building and reused to make these trusses. Beautiful sticks, though. Go ahead. This is the Stimson Mill up in Libby. This was a chip bin. These are about 35-foot 6 by 12s on about 2.5 to 3 foot centers. It was a really timber-heavy building. But often, particularly these days, it's a cost-effective way to remove obsolete structures and reclaim the materials. Very cost-effective in that often we have to buy the buildings. So, whereas conventional demolition, you're paying a contractor to remove your building. For large timber structures, I would say most of them that we deal with, we actually buy the salvage rights for the building. That was the case with the Stimson Mill here. This actually was back in early 2000. We were paid to take these buildings down, but as the value of these materials has gone up, so has the competition to get big timber buildings.
Libby is so associated with asbestos.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you had to deal with? And what do you do when that's a potential?
Big issue, and in fact, it's rare that we will get involved in a building that does not have some asbestos in it. The awareness, of course, is quite a bit higher now, and also the regulation. So before you can dismantle a building, a licensed inspector has to go through the building, test anything that may potentially contain asbestos, and then if it does, it needs to be removed by a licensed abatement contractor before we go in. And in fact, the letter of the law says if you disturb any material that potentially contains asbestos, and the material is greater than 6 square feet. So if you own your house and you want to put in a window that's greater than 6 square feet, before you can cut that sheetrock, technically you have to have that tested for asbestos. So they're very strict. I mean, some may argue that they take it a little far, but certainly there's been a lot of death and illness up in Libby, and it's serious stuff. So we won't do buildings unless sometimes in rural agricultural buildings where I'm confident that where it's pretty much all wood, we'll forego that. But generally for any larger buildings, we insist that it be tested.
Usually when you build a structure these days, you put your 2x4 or 2x6s on 16-inch centers, right? And I noticed that the third of the building closest to you, uprights are pretty much like they've been measured out, and then the other 2/3 of the building is like someone just went along and just held them up there and haphazardly nailed them into place.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder
what they were thinking there? Well, it probably didn't even matter. Because every other one had this is 2x12 tongue and groove horizontally. Then every other 6x12 had another 6x12 on the inside, through bolted. Needless to say, the structure was, didn't move. It was a little dangerous. It was that fine dust that you see in chip bins or grain bins, and we had a lot of steel that we had to get out of there. So, we had to hose things down and really be careful about creating sparks because it was attached to the finger joiner building, which was still active. So, it's kind of dangerous work, and you have to be smart about how you take buildings down.
Was it a steel roof on there?
It was, no, I think that one was an asphalt roof of some sort.
It just looks like it's vertical.
Yeah, those are just the boards. We had already removed the roof. That was, I think that was more 2x10 or 12 tongue and groove spanning timber purlins that sat on the trusses. Yeah. So as I mentioned, more affordable than demolition. And I apologize, Becky, my wife, is going to put together a PowerPoint specifically for this. And due to some pregnancy complications, we're kind of borrowing something that we made for MRL and some other businesses. So I'm not trying to sell anyone here anything, but that's kind of the way it's set up. One reason people do use our services is to, this building right here, this was in the Bitterroot up, outside of Stevensville. And there was this log house and a couple dilapidated sheds. And they just wanted everything taken off and just kind of the site restored. So this was the building. And actually, this is a little deceiving, but there was another building here, and we graded out the site, and we didn't reseed, but I actually sold some wood recently to their neighbor 6 or 7 years later, and you can't really tell that there was ever a house there. And I think some people will recognize this building. This is at the Stimson Mill here in Bonner. This was the truck shed. And or the main maintenance shop. Stimson, when they had their auction, had to consider what buildings that they wanted to keep, what they thought had, were good to reuse or that another business may be interested in, and which ones to get rid of for liability and tax reasons. And so the truck shop was one that went. And this building, and actually I think some people here were familiar with the mill. Does anyone know when the truck shop was built? And I'm just asking for my own curiosity. Is it?
Well, I think it was built a long time ago, but then they kept moving it around, cutting it up and adding to it, and as they could for the truck shop. And I remember when I first started there in '62, they would bring a vehicle and dump the oil out, and it went on the ground, and finally looked like it was paved. And then the environment said they had to start picking that up. They said, well, what the heck next? They'll probably cuss us out for where we're dumping this stuff. So it just went along like that. And I was there in '62 before they built the big building, the planer and that. Well, I graded the material for the laminated beams in that building. Mm-hmm. And then, so then they would laminate them, and then they'd take them over to the laminating plant and make this big beam. They wasn't really ready to make this big beam, but they put it on forklifts and let it slide on through the planer. Well, the one time, the guy on the forklift, he went to sleep, and the big beam fell down and went whoom, whoom, so they had this great big gouge in there. So he didn't get fired, but he was close to it. And that's kind of the way it went. And then the siding that's on there, they started that. Well, when they did the other building, they started putting that type of siding on to it was a better quality siding. And eventually they covered it up for insurance purposes with tin. They could get a big reduction on it so they started tinning the stuff. But yeah, the old shop is quite the thing, and then the stone building that was there, that was supposed to be on the historic site.
Well, and it is actually the next picture.
Still standing?
Yeah, so that was the shop, same picture with the shop gone. There's the brick building, and then you can just barely see the wood part of the stone building, the addition.
Are they going to tear it down?
No.
Yeah, they said they could never tear it down because they put it on this historic site, so.
Yeah, and as far as I know, I believe that Scott Cooney is still trying to buy half the mill, including these buildings here and further upriver. And he's told me his intention is to keep them up as is, rehab them, and you know, use them for something else.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. This was an old log structure in Wyoming, out north of Pinedale, Wyoming, way out in the boonies, about 15 miles off the pavement. And for log buildings, and I was talking with someone earlier who has a friend that rehabs these, and we will move them, tag them, take the logs apart, and then people can restack them. Sometimes maybe adjust an opening, open up another window, so that's kind of another niche thing that we do. We seem to be doing less and less of these days, but it is still something that we've done. And so in the deconstruction process, it's hands-on work. Our biggest expense by far is labor. You know, in that sense, we tend to put a lot of people to work when we are working on a building. You know, a job that would take a guy in an excavator and a side dump a week would maybe take us 2 months at least. So with a full 5-6 person crew. But because we do dismantle by hand, we save everything that can be saved. And so any timbers, lumber, we denail, we stack and band. Unsalvageable wood that's unpainted, we would take to Johnson Brothers, or if we're working in another town, someplace where that material can be ground up and used for pellets or for boilers or, biomass applications. I have not been to Johnson Brothers here in town since Stone Container has closed, and I'm not sure if they've changed their policy, but that may make it harder for us to get rid of clean wood. Any metal, of course, we recycle, although most demolition contractors do, but we, all the way down to nails, usually we're denailing in one area, sweep them up, take them to Pacific Steel. So there's very little waste. Tar paper roofing goes to the dump, sheetrock goes to the dump, but usually, especially on larger industrial buildings, we'll have 90-95% material reuse or salvage.
What do you do when you encounter transite?
So once again, that would be asbestos, and we, I had removed it in the past, suited up, double bagged it, taken it to Allied Waste, and the states really cracked down on that, where you have to be licensed, even something like transite, which is fairly easy. Transite is an asbestos product. It's kind of like a hardy board. It's like a cement board in appearance. Comes in 4x8 sheets or larger, and it was used in applications as a fireproofing wall covering generally.
Also comes corrugated.
I'm sorry?
Transite also comes with corrugated sheets.
Oh, when they use it for roofing and that sort of thing?
Siding and roofing.
Okay. So when we do encounter that, though, we just have to, call up. We never take liability for hazardous materials, so whoever either we bought the building from or who we're doing the job for, it's their responsibility to get that abated. And this is a mill up in Kalispell that, to be honest, I can't even remember the name of now, but they closed back in the late 90s. And so one thing that we're able to do, and if you get a chance, if you want to walk by our little display out there, a lot of outfits, when you buy reclaimed wood from some of the larger companies, they don't have a clue where the material is from because they're buying it from dismantlers all over the country. We've gotten into retail more. We used to wholesale mostly, and now we're getting into retail more. And so we can tell you where, where the timber, where the rough sawn one by, where the tin came from. And a lot of people are interested in that. It's a story, it's a way to have a little local history in your house or your barn or whatever you're using it for. And I'm always curious, particularly on some of these bigger jobs, I try and retain some of the stories that I hear from people that are, familiar, have worked at the mills, and try and pass that on. So, we've definitely gotten a lot of positive feedbacks from people who really appreciate the local history.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how deconstruction could be more cost affordable than demolition? Because in my mind, demolition is you go in there, you demolish everything, it's done, it's
Right.
over, you take it out.
Well, I mean, on the very most fundamental level, a demolition contractor, just by virtue of the machinery they use, is not going to recoup any value out of the materials. So we took down the truck shed at the Stimson Mill and a cooling shed, and these are just too large. The cooling shed was maybe 30,000 square feet. A demolition contractor with his excavator would have knocked that building down, maybe made a pile of some of the timbers that didn't get all broken up and sold them for a little bit. But his input into that building would have had to be covered by getting paid to take the building down. He's going to be in his machine, he's going to haul a lot of it to the dump because they can't separate clean wood from painted wood as easily, nor is it necessarily in their mindset to do so. So that building, that 30,000 square foot building, may cost the mill 50 grand for the guy to come in and destroy. Whereas I went in and I pay $5,000, $10,000, I buy the building. And so that right there, that's a difference of $55,000, $60,000 to whomever owns the building. So that's kind of the most basic way, because salvage, you can recover the material and resell it and get get paid that way. The main drawback is twofold. The time. It takes us a lot longer to take a building down. Sometimes it's kind of a shame because people will know that there's a project that involves a building to be removed, and they wait to the last minute, and then their only option is demolition because they get on these strict timelines. And if you've dealt with contractors much, it's always everything needs to be done yesterday, and everyone is in a rush. And the other thing is, on some level, it is safer to be in an excavator and to slowly crunch a building apart. It's, there's a technique and there's smart ways to do it, and you can get in trouble, but it is a lot easier and safer. Now, personally, I think I can take down a building. So far in 15 years, I've never had any major accidents. No one's ever gone in the emergency room. People step on nails occasionally, and we try and be vigilant about that even. But, you have to always keep your head up and just be very thoughtful and always assess the building and look for weak spots, and so it's not, I don't want to say that it requires more thought than demolition, but in some ways it requires a lot more awareness, I guess.
So. The other cost to a demolition contractor would be the charges at the landfill, which are very huge.
Yeah.
And so that's a major cost to a demolition project.
And that's usually incorporated in the cost, the overall cost.
Yeah, if someone wants to demolish a building, they can have pay a contractor come in and do that. They're paying him his time to demolish it, but they're also covering his expenses for disposing of that at the landfill. And that's on a per weight, ton basis or whatever, and it's costly.
Yeah, it's a volume, and they're up to $13 and change a cubic yard. So one of your regular sized dump trucks that you would see are going to be $150 a trip. And a big building, they don't take that. They take big semis and at several $100s a trip, and it might be 50, 100 trips. So it does start to add up, definitely. And the dump fees are actually just a fraction of the actual time that they. Their equipment is so expensive, and By working with skill and integrity, we dismantle unwanted timber or stick frame structures to preserve their rich history. So this just kind of touches on this building here. Once again, on the left is the Stimson Mill up in Libby. And in the background, you can see Shed 6. I don't know if anyone ever worked at that mill up in Libby, but that was one incredibly massive structure that caved in the winter of 96 and 97. It was about 6 or 7 acres of roof over that building. And the story is that they had a Jeep Willys that they parked on top, and they'd run it and push the snow off. Now that seems like a pretty steep pitch to me, but this is what somebody told me. And then by the time that winter hit, though, there was nothing going on in that building. There was no heat or no way to push snow off, and the snow load caved it in. And here's just a picture of one of my guys pulling nails. We pull a lot of nails. So this was actually, this was that big shed at the Champion Mill on the south side. This was the second, so the first job I did was at this same mill in '94. And we took down the sawmill building and a couple sheds. And then, however, a few years ago, we did the second phase where we took down the big shed and the Quonset hut in the northwest corner, and then there was another smaller crib stack shed like the big one. And this building was about 40,000 square feet or so, and for those that have never been in there, the walls were all 2x4s stacked, one on top of the other, 20 feet in the air. And not just the perimeter, there were about 50 or 60 little storage kind of stalls in there where they'd keep wood or whatnot. Everything was just stacked, crib stacked 2x4s. And this is a situation, we bought these buildings, took them down, and really the material that was in the roof was the only thing that I could, dimensional 2x4s have very little value as salvage. And to pry them all apart and de-nail them, so I gave them all away. I gave away 4 semi-loads of these wall sections to a guy that took them to Frenchtown, and then they all burned up in the Black Cat fire. Oh. He said it was impressive, though. They burned about 100 feet flame in the air all night long. So, but you know, in some things that rusty tin, this is a product that we have a lot of interest in. We sell rusty tin for more than new roofing metal. And people love that patina, they love the color, and apparently not many people have it on the website because we get calls from all over the country for rusty tin. So,
how is that used?
Application-wise, I see it often, well, at the Le Petit Autre, the bakery, and they have a new building out off of Grove Street. In that case, they use it as an exterior application, kind of just a little detail. I've seen it on gables. Generally, I would say exterior.
One of the brewing companies used that. Oh, it's in the Bitterroot. The new one, the black.
Oh, okay.
They used that for the bar, where the bartender is. They
Okay.
used it around the bar.
Sure, yeah. And you see that a lot of, you know, I think personally on a full wall, it's kind of dark and without contrasting with something else. Not that I'm a designer, but often you'll see it used to kind of contrast with a more finished material. And then we've sold some to someone in Bozeman that they were ranchers. They had an old barn and they just wanted to see if they could match up the roofing that they had because they were doubling the size of their barn. So,
Could you clear coat it with something? Or?
yeah, you could. You know, I've seen somebody just clear coat it with linseed oil. I don't know. So far, it's actually a cabin friend of mine's, and it seems to be staying on just fine. And there's not grit or anything sticking to it, so it does bring out the color a little. We've actually just deconstructed about 150 buildings, I guess, 40 of which, once again, here's the Stimson Mill, this is the cooling shed. And so yeah, we've deconstructed buildings in, all over western Montana, a little bit in eastern Montana and Washington, and Wyoming, Idaho. We're looking at an old Pope Talbot mill up in British Columbia right now, and an old Willamette Forest Products mill out in Oregon. And then I've done some barns on the East Coast. So we've kind of gotten around a little bit. So this just kind of touches on, and the lumber wrap, I was out of lumber wrap, so I went over to Trip Lumber and robbed their dumpster to have something to cover up my wood piles. But,
So is this stored out at your house in Potomac?
no, this was all material. When we were putting this together, we happened to be working at the Stimson Mill. That's why we have so many pictures, and this is at the Stimson Mill. Part of the cooling shed was left up, and so we were just storing our wood underneath it. Here's the old Champion Mill. This was another crib stacked building, and it was at one point the Presto log. They had a Presto log plant out there, which it's not uncommon for mills to have little, either the mill itself will own a business and to do things with their byproducts, sawdust, wood chips, what have you. And I'm not sure about this, but I think that Presto Log maybe was independent of Intermountain and then made these compressed logs out of some of the byproducts from the mill. So does anyone know if that's the case?
Yeah, I remember as a little kid, it must have been 1950, that they had an article in the newspaper, and they had this machine that just made one log at a time, and this piston pushed it up 4 times just to make one log, and a fellow would finally take it and stack it up, and my folks went out there and bought a few of them, and thought, geez, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Splitting logs.
Right.
For our fireplace made much more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to imagine how that could pay off, but of course now there's very little waste at sawmills just through increased technology and how they can cut a log and then all the byproduct is reused. So. This was a barn that we did out by Conrad, and this was at a Hutterite colony actually. They tend to, we're doing less and less of them just because the quantity of material that you can get, and there's a fine line between weathered, nice patina and checked and cracked to a degree where it's really not usable. And sometimes you think you are on the positive side of that equation, and then when you start taking it apart, the boards fall apart. So we're don't do as many barns as we once did, but that is another thing that we do. This, as I mentioned, was that trolley building out in Anaconda. This is not actually a hand-hewn building, but that's all right. And this was out at another old ranch out in Wyoming.
Is that snow in the logs?
No, it's just the chinking and the bleaching from the sun. Yeah, yeah. This was an old mine out by Kellogg, Idaho, and beautiful spot to work actually. And we stayed in some of the miners' quarters. No electricity, but everything was spring-fed from a spring, gravity down. So, sometimes on these more remote jobs we camp out, and this was pretty deluxe for what we're used to. And then that is actually a set of bleachers from the Linderman School up in Polson that we took down. And actually had, quite a bit of nice material once we shoveled all the snow off of it. So I think we're kind of recapping here, but you know, some of the reasons again, from a point of sustainability, I think it's kind of clear. It's the way to go in almost all. The only time I think that demolition is well, it's never more sustainable, but maybe a good option are houses. Houses, you get very little salvageable material. They take a long time. We rarely can beat a demolition bid in price because there's so much hand labor for very little return. Even then, if you can afford the time and if, you know, it's a minor difference, I think it's still a good way to go. But in all other aspects, you know, demolition, it's just, the technology isn't there to reuse material. The machines that they use cannot take timbers down without really dinging them up or breaking them, you know. Competitively priced, as I mentioned, for industrial wood framed, and I'm primarily talking about wood frame buildings here. Of course, a concrete and steel building, demolition is really your only option. You're not going to reuse monolithic concrete walls very easily. So, but for wood frame buildings, timber, stick framed, you know, we are more sustainable and definitely for industrial buildings cheaper. Safe, you know, that isn't inherent in deconstruction, but this is just talking about our company, and we really take pride in the record that we've had over 15 years. Although admittedly, when I was 24 years old and just starting out, luck played into things a little bit too. So you learn your lessons, and fortunately, you know, no one's gotten hurt, but over the years, we've learned the right way to do things. Clean, you know, that's the way to avoid a lot of problems, is keeping a clean site. You don't step on nails when you don't have material strewn all over the place. And yeah, these are all things that we made when we were trying to sell our services. So once again, professional, I mean, in that's how I make my money, that we are professional and we work in a professional way. And our time.
You have your own liability insurance?
Oh, yeah. We carried liability, workers' comp, you know, contractor's license, everything. You know, it's, you know, there are some companies, there used to be a lot more companies that were sort of fly-by-night. And it's just, it's hard. It used to be that you could exist that way, even working on larger projects where somehow people didn't ask about liability insurance. But even small projects now, it's just, you know, and I've only been doing this for 15 years, but in that time, it's very difficult to get jobs without all the legal requirements. Timely, we are, you know, at this point pretty good at giving an accurate assessment of how long it takes us to get a building down. And, you know, when I started out, I had a 25-year-old pickup and a hammer and a crowbar, you know, and so we've kind of worked our way up from there. So sort of learned by doing, which, you know, is one way to do it, and I think you learn a lot by that. So, and then here's just a quote from Darrell. I'm sure some of you guys probably know Darrell Hagee, who ran the Stimson Mill. And I think there's just a few pictures at the end here you can just kind of flash through if you want. Oh, and so when we buy buildings, and particularly at auctions, so when a sawmill or large industrial operations close, they often have an auction. And when you buy a building at an auction, you are not required to leave the site clean. So in this case, Scott Cooney bought this building at the auction, and then he didn't want it, so he sold it to me. But it was the same requirement. So we took it down and we separated. That's all the roofing, and then this is all clean wood, so that when somebody does come to clean it up, they can just take their loader or excavator, whatever they're using, and take that pile and take it to the wood recycler, and then they can take and this was the only, on a 30,000 square foot, it was a bigger building than that, but the portion we took down was 25 to 30,000 square feet. That pile of asphalt is the only waste for the whole job. And a few angles, I'm not sure why.
What's that big pile there?
Which, this here,
No, the other side.
that black pile, that's the roofing that I was talking about. That came off of, it was just a big, pretty close to a flat roofed building, and we cut the asphalt actually with a saw and then chip it up in pieces and load it in the scoop on our forklift.
That went into the dump?
No, that is whoever ends up buying the property. In that situation, when we buy a building at an auction, we don't have to clean up. But we figured we may as well separate it for whoever does have to clean it up. Then they won't have to sift through if they have the option at least to recycle the wood. And this is just the building when we were done. We tried to leave another thing at these auctions. We could have just strewn out everything across the whole site. So once again, for safety reasons, we try and really keep it pretty clean where we're working, and even if we're not required to, at least leave it, pretty clean when we're done.
So did you take down the kilns that were there on the left too, or?
No, the kilns were bought by a company out of Idaho that they actually reman dry kilns. They travel from mill to mill. Great bunch of guys, and they're out by Coeur d'Alene, I think. And so Pacific Steel, they were interested in the copper, and they kind of got it for a song. People didn't really crawl underneath and realize that the amount of copper that was in that building, because in kilns you can see everything gets kind of coated with black, and so the copper just doesn't jump out at you. And so they had gone through the building, they had serviced the building, so they knew exactly what was in there, and they bought it just to salvage the copper, and then they sold a bunch of there was steel on the roof. This is a concrete building. The roof had kind of been starting to fall in over the years. And so at some point they had drilled holes in the concrete and put steel beams above and these big metal plates below to keep the concrete from falling in. So they sold the steel to Pyramid Lumber. I think it was Pyramid or Sun Mountain, but another local mill. And then Pacific Steel approached them and asked them if they could demolish the building to get the remaining steel out and to give them a cut. I mean, he said he was ready to just leave and go home, and Pacific said, we'll give you 30% of the scrap value of the steel. So then they came in, broke up the concrete, and pulled out any remaining steel to salvage.
Where is the concrete? Do you have any idea where it went?
It's right there. The marmots love it. And then here is just the roof of that cooling shed. These were, it was built in different sections, but these were 27-foot 2x11s on 1-foot centers. And really, they used premium wood in that mill. All the wood we got out of there was a really high grade. And then here it is. These are posts and beams, so when we stack it, we sticker in between each row and just keep air flowing through, keep moisture building up. And also we can get a forklift in wherever we need to pull out a particular timber. And there's the guys working. You can just kind of flash through these. Sure. Oh, that's the truck shop there. Yeah. So, and this was, and so here's the glue lambs that maybe you were talking about went through the planer in the truck shop. Were they added later? Did they replace those, or was that original?
This in the truck shop?
Yeah.
I think they did. They made a lot of beams. We made them for churches and everything. Mm-hmm. It was just an ongoing thing. And we'd run the beams through the planer, and they had to be about less than 6% moisture, and they'd be cupped by the time they ran through the planer, and then they big cracks in them. But if they got a crack in them, they used them on the inside of the beam. It filled with glue. But if it didn't crack under the rolls, well, then they used it on the outside. So we had to grade it out accordingly. So it was a big business when they were into that. You know, they sold, besides they built their own building. And when they built the big planer building over here, they got the logs from, the plywood from Van Evans, and then they made the beams. So it was just quite a project. It was just like an in-house deal, but they, yeah. So I didn't. This truck shop was kind of going up, but I think I was working night shift when they were putting them in. But a lot of the roofs have been falling in, so they were trying to strengthen them up, I guess, with the beams.
So they had to get the lumber that they used to build those glue lamps to 6%?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that they wouldn't steam up under the glue when they hot glued it together.
So that's really, for anyone that's not familiar with sawmills, 6% is, I mean, that's maybe what you get flooring down to. Typical lumber is between 15 and 20% that you would buy. So that's,
Dimension, it could be at 19%, and that's considered dry, and
Yeah.
boards are dry at about 15%.
yeah.
So it was, but when they rejected over there at the plywood mill, they'd stick a moisture meter in it. If it was over 6%, they'd reject it. So we bring it back to the planer, and they wanted it plain square, no east edge. So then it wouldn't make the grade, so they put it on the hill and tried to sell it to farmers, and they didn't want it because the ends were all scarfed. And finally, they had to go out there and cut the ends off square that the farmers would take them. And they just, anything to get rid of them. So they wasted a lot of lumber making them beams due to that moisture content.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
I wonder where, when the university built the original field house, where the big beams were made for that. Any idea?
I'm not sure where they were built.
I think it was a old barn at Rilco. They used to make barns out of laminated, curb laminated beams. Like University bought from Rilco back east someplace that had it shipped out here.
Wow.
And with that plan at Bonner, when I was working in the land plan over there, we were making the Safeway beams.
Oh,
They were
lots of those
Safeway
trucks.
beams.
Yeah.
So the beams in the old Safeway store are from the Bonner Mill? Who was that when it was Anaconda? Yeah. And then once again, there's the truck shop cleaned up. So there you go. Any? Yeah, please.
It looks like there's a lot of technique that goes into deconstructing a building, and I'm wondering how you learned how to do that, or have you written a book on how to do it?
Well, I mean, you know, like I said, I didn't really have any formal, and I don't know that there is training and ways to deconstruct buildings, to dismantle buildings. You know, a lot of it, if you've had experience, I think, in building, or if you've just lived, you know, and done things with your hands, worked in mills, worked on farms, you know, you learn tricks with leverage. You learn, you know, how to brace things properly, or what removing a brace is going to do to a building. So I think it just takes a certain sense of like knowing engineering, basics of engineering and things like that. That doesn't necessarily, you know, come with a certificate or schooling per se, but just, you know, working out in the blue collar world.
On the original plans, or do you just figure it out by looking at?
You know, there's pretty standard ways that most buildings are put together. And so there's variations on the different materials used to achieve bracing and things like that. But you can typically look through a building and kind of figure out the smartest way. It's generally trying to figure out the safest and the fastest way to maximize the most material. And that can vary from job to job. We're working at the old St. Francis Xavier School right now, and doing selective dismantling there. They're going to demolish that building. And so in that case, we can have as much material that with certain criteria that we don't affect the integrity of the building, we can have it for a certain time period. So I have to go in there and know what material is worth and how hard it is to get it up, and kind of figure out which is the material to get out and which we just leave for the demolition contractor. You know, and it kind of breaks my heart because I'd take it all out if I could, but it all has to, you know, make economic sense, of course. So, you know, so there is, but as far as when we take down a whole building, there's pretty standard ways that we'll do it with, you know, I mean, you start with the roof generally. So, and sometimes you may loosen up a building I mean, I say that, but sometimes with a barn, you have a really saggy roof that you don't want to be on, so you take the siding off of 2 sides and the bracing out, and you just fold it over. And if you leave all your bracing out on 2 walls and take it out on 1, it just, I mean, it'll fall in a straight line. And that's just physics. It really, you know, would be hard to fall in any other way because it's braced out. So it's not rocket science, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can really get in a lot of trouble. So.
Well, there's a prime example just above the reservoir over here. Bob Starr, he worked at the pulp mill, and he was given the old Duso dairy barn if he would dismantle it. Well, the ground floor was not salvageable, but the loft, beams, decking, roof, everything, and he dismantled that. It's sitting over here on the hill, put back together as a house.
Oh, is that right? Did he put it back together like a barn, or did he just use the materials?
He was able to salvage the timbers and all that heavy structure overhead. The ground level was rotted so bad. So he just took a chainsaw and cut the roof down the center line and cut each, he had a boom truck. So he numbered all these panels.
Oh, wow.
And put up one of them, what he calls them Lego block foundations, the styrofoam filled with concrete. And then,
okay. So this wasn't too long ago then, if he was using those?
He's still in the process of finishing inside, yeah.
Oh, neat.
You look across, you see a green roof over there up on the hill.
Where was the barn then?
Out on Mullen Road,
okay.
out by Ravina out there. Duso's had a big dairy at one time.
Okay.
So he's a real, somebody gave him a Quonset hut that he went up there, unbolted it, and I helped him bolt it back together.
Yeah, some of those, I sold the Quonset hut that was part of that Presto log plant at the Champion Mill, and I
braces back in a Quonset hut. When it snows, it comes down.
Yeah, but some come apart well, and some are pretty hard to take apart.
The interesting thing on this cooling shed, when Anaconda built all the big buildings and everything, the quality control insisted to have a cooling shed so that the lumber could cool and it wouldn't be all snow on it, get it dry, and plane it. So we did that for years. Everything was numbered. They had thermometers out there. Well, when they decided to make it into a stud mill, they got a quality control guy that says, you got to get that shed off that lumber so it can dry. So we already dried it in the kiln. He says, no, my experience has been you dry some in the kiln, you get it out in the air, and it'll be dry. So he had to tear he wanted that whole shed tore down at that time. They would kind of clean out almost the big one. He got it out, so the result was, in the wintertime, ice and snow, when we put a crib up to plane it, the thing was 6 or 8 layers would be all frozen together. We said, well, what are we going to do with that? He said, take a pry bore, use your head, pry them off, throw them on the floor, we'll throw them away. So that's the way it went whenever they were frozen together. And he said, where did you ever come up with this idea that no cooling shed? He said, well, up at Helena we had a mill, and the winds were just right, and we stacked the lumber and air dried. So, well, we don't get them winds here. He said, there's wind down that canyon, but all it was grief for us. So that, of all the money they put into that cooling shed, that man, on his word, said tear it down, and they did. And then they left a little bit of it coming out of the shed there.
Oh, so it came out quite a bit further than where it was.
Oh, it came clear out to almost the guardhouse.
So as far as the tracks are, probably. Well, they took some of the tracks out then, but...
They were all numbered, and you went down that track, and it went on a conveyor and over, and then unstacked it. And then the stickers went all the way back to the sawmill again. That was quite an operation. There was thousands of sticks, and they'd get crossways in there and hang up, so you could work overtime trying to keep me inside the building and get them back over there. It was a dumb idea, really, but and then the thing wasn't high enough. And so one guy with his dump truck, he was hauling back and forth, and he forgot to lower the box. So he went screaming under that thing, was getting toward his noon hour, and he caught the bottom of them beams, and he broke a whole bunch out. So we were down for about 3 days trying to get this thing jacked back up. But each guy, the manager would come in, he'd have a different idea. And this guy, he was from the old school. You do not need a cooling shed. After the thing was all built, you know, all you had to do was just leave it there.
Did you, yeah.
I do have one more thing to say. Gary, I know that you're also very generous with your time in saving historic buildings, and Warren and I and many in this room have been really involved with preserving the powerhouse parts of it that weren't. Well, I remember a meeting we had talking to Matt Pine, and I was saying deconstruct. He said, I've got to be honest with you. We are not deconstructing that building. and they didn't, and they couldn't in a lot of times because the brick just wasn't salvageable, as he thought. However, you and Philip Meckling and others that you may be able, I don't know their names, you may be able to name them, saved some of the beautiful windows out of that structure. And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you managed to get those out of that brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, once again, it was, we just went down for a day. Philip Meckling called and asked if I'd be willing to help them get, so I think we took 2 or 3 windows out. And, you know, that's always a little tougher when you're working with masonry buildings. When you have a wood frame building, if you just want one component, you can always just fire up a saw and cut away and you'll get to it. But, so we just had to take the trim off, and very carefully. There were these arched, I think they're arched windows, is that right? And I don't know that there was a trick necessarily, but I think we just had to use a sawzall and cut around and pry a little and carefully get them out. But
They were huge.
yeah, they were big and they were pretty heavy. So.
Well, where are they now?
They're in storage for the time when we could have our interpreted. Warren has some concepts about how we can repurpose them in an interpretive center one of these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were really, I'm glad that you did call me and save those because they were really
very
beautiful.
Thankful to you for doing that.
So it just, it seems like the scale of some of these projects that you get involved with is really large, and so you must wind up with a lot of material. And I'm just trying to imagine what your place is like with all this stuff, and how do you manage to store it all for as long as you must need to,
Right.
And keep it in good shape and all of that.
So we, you know, well, it helps being in Montana where, you know, it's relatively dry. Stickering wood, timbers stickered will keep pretty well if there's a little bit of space in between them. And even when you get a little moisture in a pile for a year or two, you know, if you open it up, wipe it clean, you know, it takes several years of constant moisture for wood to really rot out here, it seems like. But yeah, my yard is out in Potomac off of, I don't know if anyone knows where Hobbs Cabinets used to be there, right off of Morrison Lane, and we're a couple miles back on Blixit Creek Road. And, but we, you know, we just try and keep wood covered up. We stack high, make sure that the top couple piles have lumber wrap at least. And we just try and move through our inventory often enough that it's not sitting for 5 or 10 years. I mean, that happens sometimes, but, and we currently have about, you know, we're not a big broker like Superior Hardwoods. I think he's got about 1.5 million board feet. We carry about 300,000 to 400,000 at one time generally. And, you know, ideally, I used to wholesale, and so it's a tiny fraction of material that we've recovered out of buildings. And, but, you know, wholesale, you get rid of all your wood, but at a much smaller profit margin. So we'll wholesale a certain amount of material often to help pay for the job, and then hold on to the rest of it. And And so now that Becky's involved with the business, my wife, she's been working for about a year and a half. I've got a full-time person who is actually, and can use a computer and has marketing experience and all these sorts of things that were real holes in the business. And we're trying to develop mostly a fairly local or regional presence in that market. We're not interested. John Medlinger, who owns Superior Hardwoods, he was one of my first customers. So I don't want to compete with him, and he still is a great wholesale buyer for me. But I think that, to be perfectly honest, he doesn't really want to deal with local people, who tend to be a little more picky and want to know about whereas that's something that we are happy to fulfill that need. So
if somebody buys a quantity of material and they show up with a truck and you load them up and off they go?
Yeah, or usually we deliver, but yeah, either way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so.
Pretty neat operation.
Yeah, it's been good. We're not rich yet, but it's been a solid, enough to survive off of, enough to give us a good life, and it's interesting. No building is the same. So every building's got its own little trick and its own little history, and you can kind of piece together the history as you take it apart. You can see, try and figure out approximately when this addition was done by the kind of materials that they used, and it's a puzzle. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work, physically, very, very demanding. Definitely on par with the concrete work that I used to do. So that's the biggest drawback, I say. It's not, you wouldn't want to be on the ground doing it for 30 years.
Well, I wish that we knew about you. You're just up the road, and we lived in an old mill house, and we had it demolished.
Mm-hmm.
And
How could you?
And built up. My husband and I, what we did was we salvaged stuff out of that house before it was demolished, because there was some really beautiful wood in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea that this even existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually quite surprised that the contractor that we were working with never brought you up.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's...
So I was just wondering how, do you have is your name out there?
Yeah,
Construction?
I'd say among a lot of the contractors in town, it's particularly Missoula or any town this size, word of mouth is really big. But we've also been in the Yellow Pages for years and have an internet presence now, and so. But there's, building in Missoula has been going through the roof. I don't know how long your contractor's been in business for, but there's a lot of people that I don't know, just because until a year and a half ago or a year ago, things were really humming along for construction.
So your home in Potomac is open to the public and people can go there?
Yeah, by appointment, because I don't have a full-time person at the yard, so. But yeah, you bet. So, I guess if we're done, I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming out. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.